Good evening. Since we have not been able to resume our regular Vespers type of services, I thought I would bring you another message this evening. And the title of what I'd like to talk about is this question: how do we see ourselves? The text for the message tonight, and this is a parable that Jesus told, comes from Luke, the 18th chapter, in verses 9 through 14. Now, I'm not going to read that up front as I normally would, but I'm going to talk about each of those verses as we go through the lesson tonight. Now, as you know, most of us are very conscious about how we look to other people and how we look to ourselves. And even though I don't have a whole lot of natural beauty going for me, but I try to look the best that I can whenever I talk to you. And as I said, I'm speaking tonight about this parable that Jesus told. And as you'll recall, a parable is just a little story that answers a big question. And you know, this parable, whenever I look at it, it makes me more uncomfortable, it makes me more convicted, it makes me more introspective than just about anything else that I see in the scripture, and makes me very much, gives me a great deal of consternation. And so I want to talk to you about that tonight. To begin with, the first verse of our text, Luke 18:9, says this, and this tells who he is telling this parable to. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and they treated other people with contempt. And so this parable is directed to those people who think that they're righteous and those people who treat others with contempt. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of Jeff Foxworthy, right? And as you'll recall, he is the expert when it comes to the recognition of rednecks. And probably his most famous saying is, you might be a redneck if so-and-so. Now, I would say then tonight, along with that we might be in this parable that Jesus told if we're not careful what we think about ourselves, about our fellow man, and most of all, with regard to God. Now, with regard to Jeff Foxworthy, I came across something the other day that I thought I would share with you, and basically what it says is this. Studies have indicated that rednecks have a lower stress level than lots more smarter and more sophisticated people, because rednecks do not understand the seriousness of certain medical terms. Now, let me give you for example. For example, a redneck thinks that a bacteria is the back door to the cafeteria. Rednecks think that the word benign is what we get after we're ate. Or a Caesarean section is a neighborhood in Rome. Or a CAT scan, for example, is simply searching for a cat. Fibula to rednecks is just a small eye. And a seizure is a Roman Empire. Labor pains are getting hurt at work. And so, as you can tell, you see, because of this, they don't really understand lots of medical terms the way that most people think of those things. Now, there's two ways that we can look at ourselves. The first way is we look at ourselves comparatively. Now, we continue this parable in Luke 18 verses 10 and 11, which says this: two men went into the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed like this: God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even this tax collector. Now, what the Pharisee was really saying to the tax collector was this: let's get something straight. I'm not like you, and you certainly are not like me. You're not as close to God as I am, and I don't belong in your company, and you absolutely do not belong in mine. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And then the Pharisee, he probably does something like this. At least in his own mind, he reaches into the bag that he's carrying and he pulls out a mirror and he begins singing to himself, "How great thou art." Well, then the Pharisee, he went on to say in the next verse, "I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I have." The Pharisee, he not only talked about things that he had not done, that is, he was not an extortioner, he was not an unjust man, he was not an adulterer, and he wasn't even like this tax collector. And then he also talked about what he had done and was doing. And he said he fasted twice a week and he tithed of everything that he had. Now, this is important because of this. The Bible says that there were 3 special holidays on which every Jew was required to fast. But the Jews only fasted on those special days. But if you were a normal, quote unquote, Pharisee, you would fast 2 days before the special day, and in 2 days thereafter. So an average Jew fasted 3 times a year. An average Pharisee fasted 15 days a year. But this Pharisee, though, what he said was he fasted twice a week, which meant that he fasted 104 times a year. So that was 33 times more than the average Jew and 7 times more than the normal Pharisee, if you would. So the Pharisee, he was loud and he was proud and he thought he was right with God because he did 2 things. He did things for God, if you would, like many times we think we do, and he also thought he was right with God because of things that he had not done, you see. So instead of looking in a mirror and singing "How great thou art," probably what he should have done was looked into the mirror and began singing this 1972 song by Carly Simon that said, "You're so vain," which he was. Now, let me ask you to do something with me. I want all of you to look up for just a second. And then I want you to look down for just a second. And then I want you to do both of them at the same time. We can't do that. That's impossible to look up and look down at the same time. The Pharisee thought he was looking up to God, and he thought he could do that and look down on mankind at the same time. But he can't do that. And we can't do that. You know, this Pharisee, he didn't have a clue, as we might say. You see, he had what I would call an I problem. You see, the only thing that was important to the Pharisee was what made I happy, what pleased I, what I wanted to do, and what I wanted to happen. You see, folks, if we have a problem like the Pharisee with I being the most important thing in the world to us, I would submit to you that we have a problem with idolatry. You see, because anything that is more important to God, anything that's more important to us, however, rather than God, is an idol to us. You see, so this Pharisee, he used the term I 5 times. You see, he had two problems. One of them was he had an inflated view of himself, and the other one was that he had a deflated view of other people, both of which are inconsistent with the teachings of Jesus Christ. So we need to stop comparing ourselves to other people, because whenever we do that, we have a tendency to compare ourselves with those who are less than we are, who have less. And when we do that, we get an inflated view of ourselves. And then we also sometimes think about people who are better off than we are. And whenever we do that, then we sometimes are filled with jealousy and with bitterness. So we should learn to see ourselves correctly rather than comparing ourselves to other people. Luke 18:13 continues and says this, "But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner." You see, these two men could not have been more different. You see, not only did the tax collector not give money to God, but he cheated his fellow Jews who actually went to church and who obeyed God, who gave money to God. But the tax collector actually stole from them, which was the same as stealing from God. So therefore, this tax collector, he stood over in a corner because nobody would have anything to do with it. Now the Pharisee, on the other hand, whenever he walked in, he got a seat on the front row. But when the tax collector came in, he went to the back of the room, to the darkest part of the room, and he didn't want anybody to see him. So we need to stop comparing ourselves to other people, and we need to see ourselves correctly. And whenever we do that, then we can see God more clearly. You see, because we are never going to be able to have an accurate view of ourselves until first and foremost we're able to see God in the right light. You see, everyone who was listening to this parable, they had probably been raised and been taught that the Pharisee was a good guy and the tax collector was a bad guy. You see, the Pharisee, he wore a white hat. The tax collector wore a black hat. And if you had taken a survey of all the people at this particular point in time, everybody would probably have been in agreement that the Pharisee was more likely to get to heaven than the tax collector. One of these two men went home right before God. The other one went home wrong before God. One of these two men went home in the kingdom. One of these men went home outside the kingdom. One of these men was innocent. The other man was guilty. And you see, the Pharisee thought that he was right with God and thought that he had a right relationship with God, but he didn't. It was the tax collector who recognized himself for what he was and recognized God for what God was. You know, I dare say that a lot of us have done this very same thing that we read about in this parable. You know, we have said something like this to ourselves: I thank God that I'm not like other people. And whenever we say that, folks, what we're really saying is, I'm just like those other people, you see, who have more concern about themselves than they are about God. You see, in this country, we spend tens of billions of dollars on making ourselves look better. But the important thing is this: it's not how we see ourselves, it's how God sees us and how we see other people. I don't know about you, folks, but I think we all need the mercy and the grace of God, because none of us are righteous in the sight of God. Excuse me. Whenever we look to God, we can't look down on other people. We have to look up to God, and we cannot allow ourselves to look down on other people. We must have the right opinion and the right view of who we are, who God is, and who other people are. Thank you very much, and good night.